Again, if I could ask everybody to take a seat, we would like to remind you that we video and audio record our meetings. So for the members of the board, when you have something to say on the record, please push your little button, speak into the microphone, and when you're finished, push the button to disengage. We have a limited number of active mics at any given time, so it's important you do this. And I think once I get the last of our board members in here, I will turn it over to Director McGallis, our finance chair, so we can begin. Do we have any board members on the phone?
I am here, Audrey, Tony Anderson.
Okay, great. If I could ask you to mute your phone when you are not speaking so we don't get any of the feedback, that would be great.
Will do.
All right. Director McGallis, we are ready to begin when you are.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to call the roll. Madam Secretary.
Okay, so you're going to call the meeting to order, and we're going to do a roll here. Director Anderson?
Here.
By phone with the appropriate paperwork completed. Director Colson? Here. Director Groven? Here. Welcome. We'll get to that later. Director Cotel?
Here.
Director Lewis?
Here.
Director Melvin?
Here.
Director Troiani? Director McGallis?
Here.
We have a quorum of 7 present with 1 absent. If the record would also show that Directors Durante, Frega, Fuentes, Higgins, Ross, Sager, and Chairman Dillard are all also present.
And just at this point, I'd like to just welcome Chris Groven to our committee, to Finance. Welcome. And I know the chairman's going to have more remarks later on in the meeting. With that, we'd like to have the minutes. Are there any questions or comments about the minutes? If not, could we have a motion to approve? Motion by Member Melvin, second by Member Lewis. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?
7 ayes and 1 absent.
Have it. Thank you. At this point in time, I'd like to turn over the comments to Leanne Redding, our director.
Thank you, Director McGallis. So before we formally convene and get into the presentations for the Special Finance Committee, I wanted to take a moment to just kind of put some things in context. The items on today's agenda are some of the most important that you consider all year, and they are tied to some of the most important work required by the RTA. It is at today's meeting that you will be presented the transit agency's proposed 2019 operating budgets and capital programs. There is no action being required of you today. It is a presentation for you to hear from them and engage in discussion with the all 4 agencies for that matter. The RTA is tasked with budget and financial oversight of the 3 transit agencies, but we do not operate independently. We are governed and controlled by you, our board, which represents the geographic subregions of northeastern Illinois. The RTA is simply the mechanism put into place that allows the region to govern the shared benefits and responsibilities of transit operations. I know we all agree that effective and efficient public transportation is essential to the functioning of this region. The economic and social benefits of the system are vast and impact every geographic corner of northeastern Illinois and really the state of Illinois as a whole. CTA, Metra, and PACE run services across many municipal boundaries. Some of the most senior staff are here today, and they will share their plans and continue to serve our region in these very challenging financial times. Because the system's benefits are widespread, the cost of supporting the region's transit network does not and should not fall to any one municipality or any one county. Instead, it is a shared cost and a shared responsibility, with fares and taxes collected in one community supporting regional services that impact citizens across all of northeastern Illinois. We'll get into the details in a few minutes, but in an environment of limited financial resources, the RTA and the service boards have again developed responsible and balanced proposed operating budget of about $3.1 billion for 2019, focused on fiscal discipline and efficiencies. The CTA, Metra, and PACE continue to deliver excellent service with the limited resources to provide 2 million rides each weekday. While this year's operating budget is balanced, the region's proposed capital program is significantly underfunded. This year's $841 million capital program and the proposed $4.3 billion five-year capital program come nowhere near the levels of funding that we need to support and maintain the existing infrastructure that we have. One particular aspect of the 2019 Regional Capital Program that cannot be ignored is that it is made up entirely of federal funding and revenue from future Service Board bond issuances. Once again, there are no state capital dollars in our capital program. In recent years, the service boards have been almost entirely reliant on federal dollars to maintain their capital assets. This year's underinvestment in our regional transit system is not new, and that's no surprise to anyone sitting here. We have seen this continuous underfunding of our region's transit infrastructure for many years. The RTA's Regional Transit Strategic Plan highlights $30 billion of projects that are needed to maintain and modernize our network. We're also suffering from cuts and lagging payments from the state. Bea will highlight those in her opening remarks. So as we hear these presentations, please keep in mind that we continue to do more with less. We continue to operate in an environment in which transit funding has not been a priority, and it simply must be for us to continue to go forward. As we move into the Finance Committee meeting, I'd like to remind everyone that this meeting and the board meeting that follows are part of the RTA's public hearing process this year. Over the past week, we have shared on our website and social media that we are inviting the public to either attend a hearing in person or view this one on the RTA website or on our YouTube channel. You can see the camera running up here as additional to what we normally video and broadcast. Besides this meeting, we're holding hearings now at locations throughout the region, so these will also be broadcast into each of the counties around the region. The public comment portion of the hearing will begin after the RTA board meeting ends. Comments for the record can be submitted to communications@rtachicago.org, or they can be sent to us via U.S. mail or in person to the RTA Attention Board Secretary, 175 West Jackson Boulevard, Suite 1650, Chicago, Illinois, 60604. Comments can be submitted until December 12. On December 13, the RTA board will consider the Service Board and the RTA's proposals. Thank you, Director McGallis, and I'll now turn it to Bea for her to give a brief overview.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee and the board. So let me start with a little process note. First, the agenda item you will hear from the leadership of each service board and the RTA about their proposed 2019 budgets and the capital programs. You will be provided with an opportunity to ask questions. There is no vote on the budget today. This will come in a little over 2 weeks at the December 13th board meeting. First, I'd like to thank the executive directors, the CFOs, and the budget and capital teams for another collaborative budget development season. We received all the budget submissions on time for the first time in a very long time, which was much appreciated and led to an orderly and efficient analysis of the proposed budgets and production of our budget materials. Thank you, Jeremy, Tom, and Rocky for that. As Leanne alluded to, I don't know if you alluded, it came right out, transit funding from the state has been cut and funding payments continue to lag significantly. State budgets continue cuts to sales tax, PTF, and the state's match to our regional sales tax. Reduced fare funding, 88 paratransit funding, now total $152 million, spanning RTA fiscal years 2017 through 2019. Additionally, delays in state payments of PTF and ASA and AFA, which are the payments on our debt service, have necessitated the RTA to continue to do short-term borrowing to maintain funding flow to the service boards. This, in turn, has led to interest costs, which are in excess of $5 million per year. Those $5 million could instead be going toward operating or capital funding. In 2018, in addition to funding efficiencies, the service boards reacted to the state cuts with fare increases to replace the lost funding. It is important to remember that the adopted 2019 funding levels of the service boards and RTA are essentially flat to 2017 budget before the state cuts took effect. In response, the service boards have crafted 2019 operating budgets which focus on cost efficiencies and without additional fare increases. However, as you might remember, the adopted RTA funding levels assume that the recent reductions to the PTF and the reduced fare funding will come to an end with state fiscal year 2020. If that does not occur, additional service cuts and additional fare increases may be necessary. With all this in mind, I'd like to turn the floor over to the service boards. The order of the presentation will be Metra, CTA, PACE, and then I will return to discuss the RTA agency budget. First, we have Metro. We have Jim Dworsky and CFO Tom Farmer. Next, we welcome CFO Jeremy Fine and Vice President Budget Capital Finance Michelle Curran. And then we will have PACE's presentation by outgoing Executive Director TJ Ross and Budget Director Reynaldo Dixon. So Metro is up first. Oh, either way.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today to talk to you about Metra's 2019 operating and capital budgets. With me here today is our CFO, Tom Farmer, and Lynette Savarella, our Strategic Capital Planning Senior Division Director. Lynette's been here the longest out of all of us doing this kind of work year after year. And as alluded to, this year is a little no different than the rest when it comes to funding, but I think we got a good story to tell as I move through here today. No fare increases for 2019. We've suffered 4 years of declining ridership. We've also had 4 years straight of fare increases. 6 of the last 7 years we've had fare increases. The board unanimously decided this year not to have a fare increase. We called it a fare holiday. And in that, we're going to have a little bit better look at whether or not the fares are directly affecting ridership. We know that they are partial affecting of ridership, but there's a lot of other factors affecting ridership. The budget is balanced and meets all the recovery ratio. Actions are required to balance the budget were to reduce our spending, reduce the fare revenue set aside for capital, and that's obviously the big decision that the board had to make. In an area where we need a lot of capital, that's where we actually found the meat to go ahead and not have the fare increase this year. Our capital program remains underfunded as discussed, but we still are prioritizing PTC, rolling stock, and bridges. So overall, our budget went up, operating from $797 to $822. That reflects just the increase in consumables and labors. But our capital budget actually went down 5.7%, and that reflects the reduction of the Met capital, once again, coming out of the fare box. Our operating budget summary is the cost increases were about $36 million. We expect the funding marks to be $11 million positive, so that'll put us at a $25 million shortfall. That was taken care of. $6 million through efficiencies and $6 million through vacancies, and then the $13 million, as I discussed, in the fare box shifting into the protect the fares. Our big drivers were fuel and the PTC cost. That's a non-discretionary, $17.2 million. That's based off of 18 into 19. Labor and fringe went up 11.8, and materials 4.1. Utilities, other costs $3 million for a total of the $36 million. Operating expenses are as seen there. The big one, of course, is the operations and maintenance. That's where the majority of the workforce is used out there to maintain and run 686 trains a day. No big surprises there on any of the other ones, with the exception of this year fuel. It looks like we're going down a little bit. But last year we had a lower number based on the 2016 summer when we had low fuel prices, and then the numbers crept up through 18. Operating revenues coming in look to be 411, sales tax is 416, and that's a security grant from old money, so that puts us at 829. Once again, $7 million is only going into the capital fare box, so out of that, there's your 829 total. Federal funding, once again, that's where we're getting the bulk of all of our money coming in to support our state of good repair needs at 173. That's been constantly, slowly growing. ICE money from the RTA at $5 million, and then the fare box revenue puts our whole capital program at 185.6 in 19. The highlights of that program are going to be rail car and locomotive rehabilitations. We're going to continue on those programs there where we're seeing great investment. We recently just broke ground to expand our 49th Street building to take our rehabs from 35 cars a year, eventually up to 60 cars a year. Funding, of course, have to follow those rehabs. That construction should be done by the end of 19, and then in 20 we should start ramping those programs up to try to catch up to state of good repair needs if the replacement monies don't come forward. Purchases, we've only set aside $10 million, but we've been setting aside money year after year, and I'll talk a little bit about the fact that we have RFPs on the street a little later to purchase new equipment. Bridges, we're currently working 13 bridges, not all at the same time, but 11 on the UP North Line, the Deering Bridge, and then Fox, or the Fox River out by Elgin. We have over 400 of our 800 bridges. Metro trains rollover are over a century old and definitely someday going to be in need of replacement. They're inspected annually. They're repairs made when needed, but certainly this is one of the biggest components of our backlog. $10 million, as I talked about, is going to that expansion at 49th Street, and Positive Train Control, which is up running on 3 or 4 of our lines as of today. $16 million will complete the 2019 deployment. A lot of testing goes on, the licensing and the operations side of the world. Major capital is only 45%. This is the 45% of our total capital budget. The rest goes to signal, communications, facilities, storage, parking, support activities, and things of that nature. And there's our 5-year programmed money only through the federal side at 537. I think we're getting an RTA bond issuance in 1 more year, so that'll help us on the rolling stock side or whatever else we need to do. The DBE participation, good number this year, 35.9 million is the total, just highlighted down there. Over the last 2 years, we've seen increases in all categories. So we went from 22 to 23% overall in DBE, and from 19 to 26% overall on the non-federal established DBE goals. This is what we're doing with our customers this year. Zone consolidation. We did a pilot project. A lot of pilot projects starting this year and into next year where we reassigned some zones to see if the fares were what's driving ridership away. So like down by the Blue Island branch, those were a Zone D. They were moved up to a Zone C, which is where the city's at Kensington on the Metro Electric. And our outermost zones, anything past 45 miles, we consolidated back into the 45-mile mark, and that would be like Harvard, Woodstock, Crystal Lake, McHenry, and brought all that into one zone. We're currently monitoring that to see if that collapse of a zone is actually helping with the ridership out there. That zone out there, those far outermost zones, that only represents 1% of Metro's ridership. So it's not going to really move the needles much, but it is at least a determining factor whether or not fares are really starting to push the riders away. We started our first 3P this year. It should actually, we signed the agreement. It'll actually start in January. It's on the Milwaukee North Line. It's a partnership with the Lake County Partners where they're actually paying half of the operating cost through the pilot. This is a very interesting proposal for us. We think it's if it works, it's a great benchmark for the rest of the region. It's going to provide early morning trains, like 5:35 right out of the Union Station with limited stops all the way up into the Lake Cook area. There's many businesses up there that are already providing last mile services for their employees, and they're seeing a great bunch of their younger employees living in the outskirts of the city right now. So this reverse commute thing is something that we're starting to see for the first time here in the Chicago region. We're going to follow this very closely. Agreements for 1 year on a pilot, and then a second year if our board and the Lake County Partners want to pursue it further. We have markers in place that if they reach certain ridership levels, then the subsidies will go away and the ridership will support it. And that's our hope. We've been actually out working with the Lake County Partners to advertise that. Once again, that should start in the middle of January. Upgrades to our GPS tracking system will be coming forward this year. Our GPS tracking system's outdated and antiquated. It's not supported anymore, so it's time that we're going to replace all that. That will help with the website and the feeds that it needs for the real-time tracking. It'll also help us with onboard announcements and schedule changes. Will be much more rapidly deployed out onto the GPS system. We're doing the RFP for new cars. We're calling it a performance RFP. Last year, we actually had an RFP on the street to buy new cars. We had done some looking around and decided that our 1939 version of car, maybe it's time to replace that. Because what we've realized is our rolling stock investments are at least 50 years old, as our oldest cars right now are 65 years old. So we looked at it and said maybe we should be investing into the next 50 years. And so we went to the East Coast and West Coast and met with all the operators out there, looked at their rolling stock, what they liked about it, what they didn't like about it. We brought in 7 car manufacturers and talked to them about building a performance RFP, one that would be designed not specifically on our specs, but more so on how fast it can be maintained, how many seats it has in it, how fast the people get it on and off the train, the things that really you don't have an opportunity to look at with the older style cars. So we're excited about that. That RFP should go out in the first quarter. We also have an RFP on the street for locomotives. With any luck, in a couple of weeks here, that should go to our board. If not, it'll go in January to our board for purchase of new or used locomotives in the Tier 3 or Tier 4 level. It's a limited purchase based on the limited dollars we've set aside, but it's a step in the right direction. Those locomotives will have one thing in common, that is they have AC traction. On our electric district with AC traction, they're bulletproof. 10 years, we've never lost a traction motor. The on-time performance on the electric district with mechanical failures is through the roof. Last year, we only had 8 mechanical failures all year. Not a one of them was a traction motor. So investing in the technology, actually, it makes the most sense for us right now, and that's one of the key components of this locomotive procurement that we're working on right now. And that's what I just touched. Major upgrade to event traps coming. We'll be doing that along with our partners at the CTA. Of course, they're leading that, and when that comes out, we look forward to that and looking at some opportunities with the new Venture app. UP West third main line projects continues to go on. That's slated to be done toward the end of next year, possibly a little later. There was some problems UP had with land acquisition. But the fact of the matter is that's going to free up capacity all the way out to Elburn, and it'll help the freight train and commuter train working together out there to help both railroads, the Union Pacific and Metra. UP North Line Bridges and Ravenswood I talked about. Ravenswood Station Ravenswood Station should be starting proposals next year to look at that. 75th Street Corridor, the SIP. We're partnered, obviously, with many different agencies, Cook County, Illinois, federal government. That phase 1, are we calling it, down there, it's about $468 million on phase 1. It's going to be $1 billion to complete the whole project, but phase 1's actually moving forward. This is where 6 different railroads all come together. It's the biggest bottleneck in the entire country. Eventually, Metra trains will go underneath the freight railroads and over different roadways. It's a great project, but once again, at $1 billion, a lot of times people thought this would never come together. Metra's contribution to this was quite minimal compared to the freight railroads and the federal government. It's a great project, though, for the whole community down there. PTC on our lines. Currently, the UP has 2 of the lines up and running. Burlington Northern's 100%. Rock Island is actually operating now. It's called Revenue Service Demonstration. Within a week or so, the 3rd UP line, UP West line, will be having PTC trains operating on it. And first quarter of next year, we anticipate putting Southwest Service and Metro Electric online. By 4th quarter, we anticipate Milwaukee North and Milwaukee West online. And then finally, into the first quarter of 2020, we'll be online with our 2 CN partners on the Heritage Corridor and the North Central Service. It's a big, obviously, undertaking. Interoperability is still our biggest challenge, making all 13 railroads talk to each other in the back office. LA has finally figured that out with 4 railroads. We anticipate the lessons learned out there, since they have very similar systems, will transpose right here into Chicago. And 24 newer locomotives. I say newer because they're not new. Earlier this year, we purchased some used locomotives. One of those is from San Diego, and one of those is from Washington State. They're called F-59s. We believe they're going to give us at least a 10% fuel efficiency. They're 1998 locomotives. For us, that makes our fleet get younger by buying 20-year-old locomotives. We got them at a bargain price of $1.3 million. Right now, brand new locomotives are $7 to $7.5. These are not AC technology. However, we have plans in place to try to convert those to AC at some future point. They were recently rebuilt within the last 5 years by Amtrak, so we're feeling like we're getting a pretty good used vehicle here. And this is what they look like after they've gone through just a little quick paint to get them on the road. Our intention is to have 5 of them on the road by the end of the year. I believe the inaugural run will be this Friday of the first one. These will operate all on the Milwaukee lines, Milwaukee West, Milwaukee North, and North Central, due to the fact they don't have what's called cab signals. On the lines that have cab signals, you have to have cab signals on the locomotive. That's about $75,000 just for the material to put that on there. So as PTC matures, there's a great possibility all cab signal systems will be retired. So we're not going to invest in the cab signals just for a few years. So we all know that hope for a capital bill is here, and I think a lot of times people say, well, what are you going to do with that, and what's it going to look like, and what is your ask? So what I've put together at our last board meeting, and I'd like to share with this board here today, is a little preview of what that ask is. Over the next 5 to 7 years, Metro's looking for $5 billion of capital assistance from, I'll call other people's money, or the state in this particular case. We're going to use 3 guiding principles for this. Safety and security are our number 1 guiding principle. If it's, because I can't project that $5 billion will actually come just because we asked for it, but if capital dollars come, first and foremost, safety and security. Reduce operating costs. Anything we can do to increase the efficiency and continue to hold down our operating costs, which helps stave off future fare increases, that would be our second priority, and anything we can do to increase ridership. So what does that look like? And in no particular order. Locomotive purchases, once again, brand new locomotives. Locomotives with AC technology, locomotives that are more fuel efficient, locomotives that are environmental friendly. Once again, at $7 to $7.5 million, I'm not too excited about that price tag, considering a freight locomotive of similar characteristics is purchased right now for about $3 million. So we're going to continue to work with the manufacturers once we get some money in the coffers so we can start looking at replacement. We have 150 locomotives out there right now, and you can see just by buying 24 used locomotives or a few remanufactured locomotives, it's really a dent in really what is the nuts and bolts of making that train get down the track on a daily basis. Coach purchases, I put up the number of 400. 400 represents everything that is 38 years old or older. So by the time we would get the money, get the procurement in place, they'll be 40 years old. And really by that point in time, the coach is really worn out. Once again, 65 years old are our oldest coaches at this time, but 400 would represent almost half of our fleet. It's about 40% of our fleet that we can modernize. And once again, the goal here in the modernization to make them more reliable, reduce the amount of maintenance on them, do things like not have to take 9 days to change out air conditioners, but change out air conditioners in 1 hour. And that's what we've seen when we went to the other railroads. Just an opportunity to become more efficient. Locomotive conversions to AC, I touched on that. I put 54 up there because we also have a whole nother fleet of locomotives, our MP36s that we just rebuilt and are finishing that project up. They're primed to start converting those over to AC and taking a look at that and trying to get some return on investment with that technology. Bridges, right now, like I said, we're working 13 bridges, but really at the pace we're at, we're kind of contracting out 2 to 3 a year. So the goal would be to increase that right now to about 10 a year, and then buy some further time by doing some different type of bridge inspections and trying to reprioritize which way we're going, not just looking obviously at age. Station enhancements. This is what the passengers see when they come. In a lot of cases, what we would look at is more enhanced lighting, security cameras. A lot of our stations don't really even have shelters to get you out of foul weather. Once in a while, if a train has an issue, a freight train interference, a switch failure, a mechanical failure, there's a lot of people on these platforms. A little, like I'll call it a pace bus shelter, a 3-sided shelter really isn't the best thing to do for our passengers. So one of the things we've really looked at is we can't replace all these stations. There's 242 of them, 79 of them are in the city, but we could actually start putting things on there to make the passengers have a better experience as they're waiting for that train. A2 replacement, that's where the 4 lines that go to the Milwaukee, including the Heritage Quarter, that stage is in there, and the 3 Union Pacific lines that go to California Avenue all cross each other. Built in the early 1930s, sitting on a bridge that was built around 1910. This complete replacement most likely would look like a realignment, a grade separation where one would fly over the other, and you would never have to cross each other. It's literally the Achilles heel of Metra. You don't hear about it a lot because we put a lot of maintenance, a lot of effort. Any snowstorm, there's maintainers that literally have to live there just in case one switch fails. It's air-operated system. So the technology in this place, you can replace all those switches, but it's probably the best, our feeling is best is to grade separate it so one train set flies right over the other train set. Service enhancements, more express trains. So we know for a fact on the Burlington Northern, when we run express trains, they fill up. We have 1,700 people on our busiest train out of Naperville, hot shot coming in, 32 minutes. Fact is, that's what our passengers want. That's where we can beat the automobile, and that's where we can gain ridership. But what does that mean? That means putting more trains on tracks. Most of our yards, even on the Burlington Northern and on the Union Pacific lines, our yards are stuffed. We cannot physically put more cars in the yards. So what does this look like? This looks like land acquisition. This looks like equipment purchases and eventually running trains that make more limited stops and not the milk runs. And line by line by line, is this possible? Each line's got its unique opportunities and challenges. The Southwest service, once the 75th Street SIP's done, that starts opening up a possibility, but then we have to get double track in there because there are certain areas of the railroad where there's only one train's allowed on the track and it's got to finish before the next one comes through. So what does that look like, more express trains? It looks like the land acquisitions, and it looks like eventually putting more mainline tracks in and putting back in the infrastructure that was taken out by the previous owners as they went bankrupt years ago. I think we're at that potential right now where we see this on a lot of our lines. Those express trains are where people will get out of their way for. I just recently read in Naperville where there is something like a 7-year wait list just to get parking permits at Naperville. So that tells us there's a need and a desire to be there. Now we just got to put more cars on those trains and more trains on the tracks. Union Station only allows us to bring trains in at 11 cars. Only a few tracks allow 11 cars. So it's not as simple as just add more cars to the train. And so in the case of that, we just have to run more trains. We have to look at the fluidity of each different district. We've got a lot of great plans, and once again, would be something we would do at capital investment. Rock Island District electrification, I call it phase 1. This would be from LaSalle Street Station to Blue Island. This is a big environmental type of impact. We do know on the electric district with the fact that AC technology and that overhead wire type system, it runs much more efficient. We saw a 25% reduction in electricity consumption over there. So this would be a way to do a lot of different things. Rock Island was picked because really we own it. It's not a freight line that we would have to negotiate, so as a fact, we own it. Going to Blue Island, it would go right through the Beverly neighborhood. Right now, we're running diesel trains through there at 30 miles an hour. They'd probably still be at 30 miles an hour, but think about the environmental and the noise and all that kind of stuff that would be beneficial to the residents of this region. We'd also be looking at new technology, and it's very vague in that because there's things called DMUs, diesel multiple units, used in a lot of different airports right now. There's also battery power getting started out there. Just up in Milwaukee, they just launched these battery-powered trolleys. They run their run, they put a pantograph up, they recharge their batteries, they run the run the other way. The whole time they're running on batteries. Great for the environment, and looks like, once again, a reduction of a cost once you don't have to put that fuel back into those things. 75th Street SIP, right there is finishing it, and the Rock Island improvements. Once again, a large capital bill would help us partner with the second half of that big project. Then the portion about bringing the Southwest service over to the Rock Island line. So right now, the Southwest service actually is housed and stored inside the 14th Street yard where the Burlington Northern Santa Fe is at. So to even add trains there, we have to remove trains from the downtown terminal. This is one way to remove trains from the downtown terminal, but not the only way. So we would look at any options we can, but that just frees up instantaneous track space. The Southwest service coming over to LaSalle Street, LaSalle would be expanded to 10 tracks versus the 8 tracks that it is now, and it just allows, once again, for growth on multiple different lines. And then finally, O'Hare service. I put that up there because we go to O'Hare. We don't go to O'Hare that often. Matter of fact, I was with someone the other day, and they said, I want to take a train to O'Hare. I said, what time's your flight? We looked at the schedule, and it wasn't going to work. We just don't go to O'Hare frequent enough. There's probably a couple different opportunities we could look at because we do go right next to O'Hare, both on the south and on the east sides. That would take serious infrastructure, putting bridges back in, an additional main line, special equipment. But once again, you talk about Elon Musk in the tunnel, or you talk about different opportunities here. I think Metro stands here to be part of that conversation about how fast we could get to O'Hare. I think we could do 30-minute service to O'Hare every 30 minutes. We possibly could be coming out because of the way A2 is configured right now and the way it still could be configured even with the grade separation. We could be coming out of 2 downtown terminals and servicing O'Hare. So I think it's a good conversation piece to start. But once again, I look at $5 million and I wonder whether or not that's going to be within the realm of possibility. With that, I thank you, and we'll take any questions you might have.
Thank you, Jim, for a very informative presentation. I think you really covered a lot of the areas that I know many of us had questions about. Before we get into a lot of the questions of the board, I was wondering if you could share with us what you heard at the different public hearings as far as things that the public's concerned about your proposed budget, whether it be capital needs or whatever.
It's interesting, in a year where you had no fare increases, there wasn't a lot of attendance, and even on the online presence, most of it was surrounded around that they're just thankful that there wasn't a fare increase. There does seem to be a need. I know at our Chicago meeting, there was a lot of people that did come and talk about exactly what I talked about, the need for capital and the fact that it's time to invest into the system. But overall, the biggest comments we got were the fact of no fare increase.
And one of the things that you talked about in your presentation was the ridership, and you're looking at about a 0.4% reduction, or at least a reduction in ridership. What are your plans for trying to attract new riders and to keep the ones we have?
So we're doing several pilots. The first pilot, of course, is the zone consolidation, where we're looking at seeing if by reducing the fares we can attract riders back to the system. We're looking at weekend service this coming year. Our biggest losses actually are in their discretionary time, not during the peak periods. And so during the discretionary time, we're going to look at different fare structures this year to see if maybe an evening pass makes sense, seeing if people want to come downtown or go somewhere during the evenings. We're going to do a pilot program in this summer where we're going to expand service on weekends, make it more user-friendly for people to start using the system. We have a $10 weekend pass right now that's still good for 2 days, and I think we're going to leave that. But we're going to take a look at the different places that we can go ahead and try to look at the fares and maybe even the service level. And I think the weekend one's going to be a great pilot for us to determine going from maybe 1 hour service to half-hour service or 2 hour service to 1 hour service, respectively, to try to increase ridership.
Well, speaking of fares, again this year we have the reduced fare of the $34 million shortfall potentially from the state if they don't fund it again. Each year for the last 3 or 4 we've had to continue to include the dollar amount, in your case about $1.5 million, anticipating that the state will make those payments, and each year you've had to deal with it. I would assume in this year's budget you're looking at the ability to cover that 1.5 if the state doesn't provide us with reimbursement.
Absolutely, yes. We'll have to look at our head count, and we'll have to look at a little bit of efficiencies. We'll never obviously compromise on safety, but there are opportunities throughout the course of the year sometimes to do different things, and 1.5 million is not something we can't handle.
Great. The positive train control program, which has been a major cost to Metro and to certainly other lines throughout the country. This year is the last year, it looks like, as far as being bringing everything up to date, and then you'll have an ongoing cost. Could you talk a little bit about the closure of, you're going to, by the end of this year, or end of 2019, I should say, have achieved the positive train control implementation?
So the mandate right now is actually the end of 2020, to be clear. There's an extension that we have in. We anticipate getting an answer back from the Federal Railroad Administration here in December that we've been approved for the extension, or they call the alternative schedule. That allows the railroads to complete installation and operations by the end of 2020. Our goals right now are to achieve that by mid-2020. Through the course of 2019, we will get to the point where we're deploying all lines with the exception of the North Central Service and the Heritage Corridor. The ongoing operating costs, we estimate between $10 and $20 million. This year we've budgeted a little bit of that, as we still have capital dollars that we're doing for the testing portions of this and the deployment portions of this. But as the operating side comes online, we're going to start absorbing some of that operating dollars. So currently, like right now on the Union Pacific and the Burlington Northern side, They're dispatching our trains with their back offices. That's just part of our PSA agreement with them to go ahead and absorb those costs through the PSA. It's not actually like a direct cost, which Metro would have. Metro, as we light up the electric district, light up the Southwest service, and continue to expand on the Rock Island, our costs will start going up.
One of the things you mentioned also, going back a minute to ridership, is the fact that you're not raising fares this year, which I think is a relief, although I think the fares that you did increase over the past few years were really needed, and I'm glad that you were able to do that. And looking at your budget, in 2020, you're looking at an 8.3% higher revenue from passengers. What kind of increases are you anticipating making as far as fare increases or in 2020, if any?
Yeah, that's not to be determined yet. Basically, as we move through the course of 2019 and we see what the ridership's doing, we're doing a hard look at some station optimization study with no definitive measures to be taken there yet that could look at cost structure and kind of absorb some of that. We also have another pilot program with the fare structures going out. We call it the Round Trip Plus Pass. That'll come out with the new Venture app. So there are going to be a few things that we're going to monitor to see if we can continue to whittle away at that projected 2020 figure.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions from the members or anybody on the board? Yes, Director Lewis.
Jim, I know there's been a lot of conversation about the last mile traveled and trying to partner up, whether it be with other providers, whether it be Pace or whether it be Uber or Lyft. Could you give us an update in terms of the conversations, because that has a direct impact on ridership? Clearly, the most efficient way to get downtown is on Metro, but getting to Metro has always been the issue. And I think when you mentioned Naperville, that's one of the examples where if they could get to the train by an alternative method, it might help ridership.
Yeah, absolutely. At APTA, American Public Transportation Association, that's one of the key conversations that we have with the TNCs, Ubers, Lyfts, and even Chariots of the world. Now, Chariot's out in Oak Brook now, and we actually had Chariot in to talk to them about providing those solutions. And one of the places we've talked to them to go to is work with the municipalities. They're the ones that right now have the congestion on the roadways. They're the ones that would benefit the most about actually partnering with people like say, the Chariot. And we're going to actually start sharing a little bit of the van pool idea from Pace that they use, possibly like a place like Naperville, and saying, are you guys using the van pool? Should you use the van pool? Maybe the van pool needs to get front row parking to take 10 more cars off the street and have one van do that kind of work. But we're clearly in that conversation. Once again, I don't think we're the drivers of that. We definitely know that is a solution that needs to be handled. And I think each and every business handles it differently. Some businesses are actually funding those things as far as like a reverse side of the commute. As far as the getting to the train side station, Pace definitely is a partner with us in certain areas and the TMAs that are out there.
Yes. Sure.
Mr. Nowinski, you indicated that you're looking at a $5 billion over 5 to 7 years request should a capital bill be approved. And you did a really thorough analysis of that, and I'm very appreciative of that. You indicated that you'd be looking at 40 new locomotives, 400 coach purchases, 54 locomotive conversions, 10 bridge repairs per year, station enhancements, and you also mentioned yard expansions or movements. If you were to prioritize those, where do yard movements, yard expansions fall in kind of the priority list of those major purchase requests?
You know, clearly we're going to have to weigh this in with our board, but security and safety, like I said, would be our first order of business. So in enhancing the security of the stations, and in some cases, we don't even have cameras on any of our train cars. And once again, that would be, it's buried in there, security enhancement. To answer your question, where do yards fall? So each and every line has unique opportunities. The Northwest line right now has 4 yards at the outer points. Every one of those yards is overfilled. Harvard doesn't even have running water. Crystal Lake and Barrington are right down in their central part of town. An idea would be, of course, to build a combined yard on that line. We'd have to partner, obviously, with the Union Pacific. We'd have to look at different dynamics out there. So the reason I even put 5 to 7 to even go there is because I recognize the fact that there is environmental issues that have to take place, and sometimes you just can't project how long that's going to be. But I would say it's fairly high if the dollars come in high. If the dollars don't come in high, I think the first and foremost thing is going to be safety and security, and then anything we can do to reduce our operating cost, to maintain the existing system that we have in the 6-county area. To try to grow the system right now and not make us more efficient, I don't think is the right thing to do.
Well, certainly, I don't think anyone would question the fact that safety and welfare has to be the top priority in all of the operations that are occurring across the service agencies. You mentioned early on in your commentary that 1% of the ridership is coming from that kind of far northwestern area on the northwestern line. And I think that one of the things that we're always looking to do is to increase ridership as well, and certainly rail yard improvements or expansions would accommodate increased opportunities, I think, from that region, especially since we are anticipating larger residential growth in those areas as well. And so we need to try to balance, I think, the growth opportunities for usage and ridership as we look at those operations as well. So I appreciate your comments, and I'm grateful for the report overall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Director Coles.
Sure. A couple of quick questions that impact my area in the north suburbs. We see a lot of CP freights rumbling through Glenview on your tracks. I wonder how much revenue does that represent? And is there a possibility to...
Would you please turn your mic on so we...
It's the CP freights rumbling on your tracks. How much revenue do you get from that, and is there a chance to get more revenue using your lines for freight service, or is that not a thing you want to do?
No, absolutely. That's a great question. No, we do get revenue. We have trackage rights agreements, just like when we operate on freight lines, such as the CN. We pay per axle per mile. There's agreements in place. If you need an exact dollar, I think we can get you that. But the fact is, absolutely. So we actually are starting to talk with, I'll have to say, an undisclosed partner to operate on one of our own lines to possibly bring in some revenue. Now, the problem is it's the curfews. So in the Chicago Protocol, which is an unofficial way we operate around Chicago, which prioritizes which trains go where when two trains have to cross each other or share trackage, passenger trains get the first priority, but that's through what we call the 2 peak periods, and we call those the curfews. So if you're a freight operator and you just want to run your train from here to there, wherever you want to run, that doesn't work. Sometimes you're going to have to sit and wait till the end of the rush hour or get it through before the beginning of rush hour. So like on our Rock Island line, we have freight traffic that runs, and it runs only at night. Every once in a while, we let one through during the middle part of the day. We'd love to see more traffic there because we have capacity to handle some freights. On the Fox Lake sub, which goes to Fox Lake, cuts out at Roundout just north of Lake Forest, we only allow 2 freight trains on that tracks. And they only are allowed to run between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. because we got to get them, a single track, we got to get them on and off the railroad. But you are totally correct. Anytime we have freight train, we operate 60 freight trains on average a day on Metro tracks that we generate revenue from.
Okay, maybe you can give me the actual number, because
I think we
get
can.
questions will the time from people.
I think Tom will be able to provide you that.
And it's reassuring to people when I tell them that they complain about the freight trains, that it's revenue and it's keeping your fares down. So give me the number if you can.
Absolutely.
That would be helpful. And you talked about capital projects and the A2 crossing. What about A4 Western Avenue, where you got 2 lines crossing? Is that on your wish list at all to maybe, or is that not a problem? You got the UP West line coming in,
Yeah.
and you've got the Milwaukee District lines coming in.
That's
And
A2.
A2? Oh, that's
That's A2 over Western Avenue.
Oh, I thought that was A4. Oh, well,
No,
I know.
yeah,
Okay.
it's A2 is over Western Avenue Street. Little history. A is that line, 2 is the mile marker.
Oh, okay. Well, that would be a useful project,
Yes,
I think.
yes, and expensive.
And then lastly, when on this new rolling stock, is it possible to talk to other transit agencies around the country and put in joint orders to lower the price?
I have 3 commuter railroads right now interested in partnering with us. They love the concept of going to performance-based RFP. 2 of them actually said they already have the monies set aside. So one of our problems that we had with the last RFP that we pulled off the street was we only had 1 bidder. That was the Chinese. That's public. We didn't feel that they were going to produce what we needed. The cost was too high because we were only asking for 25 cars. And we also looked at, once again, a 1939 design. And we really said, should we invest at a high dollar value with an unknown manufacturer at a low car order at a high price? And we made the decision to pull it off the street. Since we've had those
Tony Anderson.
conversations and we went to the East Coast and West Coast, we've already attracted attention to say, how about a joint order to help build up that base? We feel that a base order of around 200 will make that purchase competitive with the price.
Okay, well, thanks. Well, you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments? Yes, Director Melvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim, we always like to have you here because, you know, the way you breeze through this wide variety of very complex issues is really very, very enjoyable and very, very interesting. You have a lot of big asks here. These are all big projects and very, very exciting stuff. And it just, you know, and Tom knows where I'm going with this, actually. You continue to reject the idea of issuing bonds to get some of these big capital problems solved, and I'd love any updated thinking or you know, thoughts about that. Also, I'm wondering if you're going to hedge oil now that you've had the swoon here in prices, if there's any interest in that. And lastly, is Lake County Partners a private equity firm? Is that? Can you tell me anything about that, or who you talk? Yeah, sir.
They're quasi-public. No.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Bonding, so or financing, or taking out a loan. We've definitely have those discussions all the time. When is it right? When can we see a return on investment? How are we going to pay for it? With the limited federal dollars that we have coming in, and really that's all that's coming in, how do we really pay for the financing side of it? I can say we came close a couple times this year to actually dipping our toe in that water, getting our first credit card, as you'd say, on a small purchase. We were looking at that with the 24 locomotives, but we then decided again not to do that because we actually had the money available, and why pay the debt financing? But certainly with these huge projects, that's going to be a conversation that happens. I believe in the places that if the funding is known and coming in and we can support it, it may make a lot of sense on some of those projects. Absolutely. And then the second part of your... We're not allowed to hedge, but we did lock forward for 2019, and we are actually locked at budget at 90% of the fuel that we need next year. We didn't go to 100 because we actually have high hopes that these F-59s that we just bought with their fuel savings will go ahead and see a fuel reduction in consumption. And so once you lock, you have to purchase, and so we didn't want to put ourselves in a predicament where we're forced to purchase fuel that we didn't need.
Thank you. Makes a lot of sense.
Are there any other questions or comments? Chairman Dillard.
So to put your fares in a national perspective, where do you rank among your peers?
East Coast, we are 50% or under. We were out on the East Coast. I looked at their timetables. I looked at their fare structure. I looked at their parking. They're parking $7.25 to $20 a day. Our highest parking's $5. Most of our parking's under $2. On the West Coast, they're some of them are a little more comparable to us. Much smaller size systems, so they obviously have a different operating component. With respect to Canada, we're less. With all of our peers, we are the lowest. But specifically the New York area, Boston area, we're 50%.
I just think that's really important for riders to understand. And the other thing that they need to understand, and it was funny, I had a major CEO the other day tell me that, you know, he plunked down his $6 or whatever it is to ride from the western suburbs into Union Station. And I told him, I said, you know, that pays for maybe half of what the real cost is. And even a major CEO was sort of surprised that the fare, you know, really only was a partial coverage of what the true cost was. And, you know, I said, you should park downtown and look at that $42 parking bill, you know, that comes out of the machine when it leaves. Have you had an incident yet where PTC on the lines that it is now on has actually kicked in and changed the operation of a train?
Yes.
And then last but not least, you must be clairvoyant, and you are. You do a great job with your staff every day under brutally difficult circumstances financially that you operate under, including a little reminder on Monday of our Chicago weather conditions also keep you on your toes. Yesterday, Leanne and I went
Tony Anderson.
and heard Commissioner Scheinfeld from the Chicago Department of Transportation speak, and an alderman grabbed me after the meeting and wanted to talk about O'Hare and said, he may have a meeting coming up with you, but he clearly said, we need to do a better job of letting folks know that we do have service to O'Hare. And his particular point was when you exit the train at O'Hare, the signage to get you to the terminal needs to be improved. He said you kind of get off and you can't quite figure out what you're doing. So clearly he thinks, and this is a prominent Chicago alderman, that there's a signage issue at O'Hare. And then the last thing that he said was, I noticed and I read that Dallas, which would be an economic competitor to us, now has has service to their DFW, as I would call it. And the more we can probably do to improve Metra's ability to get people to O'Hare, especially with Mr. Musk's proposal with the city, to remind people there are other ways to get to O'Hare other than driving or the traditional ways. But stay on the O'Hare situation because it's on the radar screen. I think of this of the city. So thank you as always, and we really appreciate the cooperation. I know our staff does with your staff. So thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, thank you very much, Jim, for attending today.
Thank you very much.
B, do you want to introduce the next group?
Speaking now will be Jeremy Fine and Michelle Kern.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
I'm Jeremy Fine, the CFO. Thank you. Was unable to join us due to a prior commitment out of town, so apologize for that.
Let me just explain. Dorval's in DC. Jim is now going straight to O'Hare, and right at the end of this, I'm getting on a plane straight to the airport too, because we've got the APTA end of year legislative meeting in Washington DC. So that's where Dorval is. He's on the executive committee. I punted. He's carrying the water for the two of us there, and I'll catch up to him later. So.
Thank you. So just to give a brief overview of our budget, the 2019 budget is a $1.55 billion budget. It does not include a fare increase or service cuts. However, the state has impacted our operating and capital budgets. The state budget cuts are estimated to be $15 million for 2019, or due to the 1.5% surcharge on sales tax receipts and the 5% reduction in the public transportation funding, the PTF. The budget does assume that the PTF and the reduced fare reimbursement funding is restored with the state fiscal year 2020 budget. As you know, the CTA provides over $100 million of free and reduced fare rides, and we typically have received $28 million, but since 2015, that's been cut to $14 million. There's also been no state capital bill since 2009, which has an impact on the CTA between $200 to $250 million a year. That said, the CTA continues to find cost savings and additional non-fare box revenues. Since 2011, the CTA has realized over $330 million in cost savings and additional non-fare box revenues. To put that into context, that's about 20% of our overall budget. And over $150 million has been achieved during President Carter's tenure since 2015. Again, as a percentage of our budget, that's about 10% that we've been able to belt-tighten and create additional non-fare box revenue since 2015. The 2019 budget includes cutting $18 million in labor costs by freezing 150 positions. That's an increase of 80 positions over 2018. Locking in fuel and power costs provides us budget certainty and a savings of $3.3 million. And we're also holding the line on contractual expenses. On the expense side, we're seeing labor costs are increasing based on contractual wage agreements with the conclusion of the ATU agreement. Fuel costs increase due to rising gas prices, and debt service costs continue to grow due to a lack of the state capital bill in our requirement to bond out in lieu of the $200 to $250 million that we would have otherwise received from the state. For revenues, fare and pass revenues are budgeted to increase slightly based on the current trends and a full year of the UPass increase. Public funding is expected to grow based on the RTA projections for sales tax growth and assumes a restoration, again, of the PTF and the reduced fare subsidy funding through the state fiscal year 2020 budget.
So on the next slide, we have our proposed 2019 operating budget schedule. The primary drivers, as Jeremy mentioned, that are increasing the operating budget are labor costs due to the contractual wage increases that were settled earlier this year. Fuel costs are increasing due to higher gas prices and debt service costs resulting from a lack of state capital funding. These increases are offset by lower material costs due to belt tightening. We've increased our warranty reimbursements, and we have tighter controls on our ordering process and targeted capital campaign work. So for example, we've identified that the traction motors on our oldest rail cars, the 2600 series, have been failing more frequently. So we're doing targeted capital campaign work to fund that, which also alleviates pressure on the operating budget. It's also offset by growth in sales tax revenues, albeit the public funding growth is lower because of the the surcharge on the sales tax revenues and the cut in PTF. CTA also has diversified and growing revenues. We have a diverse revenue stream that has been growing over the years. The fare increase earlier this year and the new $16 million per year ride-hailing fee have bolstered system-generated revenues. In 2019, 46% of the revenue will be system-generated. And despite the state cuts, public funding has also grown. So while public funding is subject to continuing appropriation, the state imposed the 1.5% permanent cut to the sales tax revenues, though they did reduce it from 2% with the state fiscal year 2019 budget, and the temporary 5% reduction to the public transportation funds that was part of the state fiscal year 2019 budget, also reduced from 10% but extended. The reduced fare subsidy, though, is subject to annual appropriation, which has been cut since 2015. Obviously, we continue to fight downstate to get these funding sources restored.
With increased competition on ridership, we continue to keep a keen eye on the trends and impacts that we've seen. In 2018, we see that the trend, or for 2019, we're expecting that the trend will continue to decline, but the good news is that the rate of decline is slowing considerably. 2018 is forecasted to be lower than 2017 by 2.5% as compared to the original budget level of 3.7%. This translates into a ridership and outperformance of over 5 million rides. So again, very excited to see the trend starting to shift here to a lower rate of decline. The fare increase has a smaller impact on ridership than we previously expected. So again, we see some slight outperformance on the revenue garnered from the fare increase. That was also bolstered by the fact that you also saw gas prices rising during the past year. 2019 ridership is expected to decline 1.3% to 461 million rides. Strong loop employment and the fare increase have also shifted folks from pay-per-use to passes. So we've seen a pass sale increase in 2018, which again, once folks have that pass in their pocket, we're also seeing an impact on ridership because each of those incremental rides, once you have the pass, are essentially free. Peak rail ridership continues to outperform other time periods during the day. So again, we're the mode of choice for folks, particularly during the peak hours. But again, we continue to look at ways to, again, get people into the passes so that those non-peak rides continue to come onto the CTA system. Factors that impact ridership are gas prices, which are slowly increasing, which again is having a positive impact on bus ridership in particular. Share mobility, we continue to keep a look at because the ride-hailing apps, the car sharing, the bike sharing, and other options out there continue to have an impact on ridership. We're also seeing traffic congestion and shifting population trends having an impact on ridership. And then bulk ticket sales to service organizations, social service organizations, have increased in 2018 as state funding to these agencies has begun to flow again. So we're excited not only for the services that they deliver, but also the impact that they have on CTA and buying the passes for those social service organizations. We're expecting that trend to continue through 2019.
So next we'll move to the 2018 forecast, which is 1.49 billion, which is 1.6% lower than the 2018 budget. Expenses are favorable by 24.3 million due to aggressively managing spending levels, primarily to offset reductions in reduced fare reimbursement and public funding. Based on the RTA marks, public funding is projected to be slightly below budget, about 5 million below at 801.6 million. However, it's currently tracking close to budget, and the real estate transfer tax is actually exceeding the budget. Sales tax revenues improved in 2018 after weak growth in 2017. And the state's fiscal year 2019 budget lowered the permanent surcharge for sales tax collections from 2% to 1.5%. But it did include the 5% reduction to the state's 30% public transportation matching funds, which was not anticipated but is lower than the 10% reduction that was included in the state fiscal year 2018 budget. System-generated revenues are down about 19 million, primarily due to reductions in reduced fare reimbursement and other revenues. So 14.4 million is due to the state budget cuts to the reduced fare reimbursement. 6 million is due to lower other revenues, which is primarily non-capital grants, which are offset on the expense side. And 0.4 million for advertising, charters, and concessions. These reductions are offset slightly by higher projections for fare and pass revenue and higher investment income. It's also important to note that CTA did repay the $22.5 million operating line that we borrowed in 2017 due to the state cuts.
And that's as promised. We had talked about through the 2018 budgeting process the need to draw down on that line of credit. Because of the impact of the state cuts midway through the year, we didn't have enough runway to fully implement the belt-tightening measures that we needed to be able to close that gap in the time period allotted. We then subsequently issued the line of credit for 22.5. We paid that off earlier than expected. So we paid that off by the end of September, so we were very excited about that. And again, I think that it just continues to prove the fact that we've been able to implement different expense reductions and revenue enhancements to be able to compensate for that. But again, that becomes harder and harder, and that's why it's so critical to continue to see the revenues that we've historically gotten from the state come back online, whether it's the operating revenues through the reduced fare reimbursement or PTF, or the capital funding that we talked about in the form of the $200 to $250 million a year.
So the next slide shows the budget versus the forecast. So operating expenses, labor increases due to the contractual wage increases implemented earlier this year. Materials are decreasing due to belt tightening and the targeted capital campaign work that we talked about earlier. And fuel and power have some slight outperformance due to locking in favorable rates and lower consumption. And other expenses are lower due to belt tightening as seen through lower contractual expenses. Operating revenues, fare and passes are increasing, as Jeremy mentioned, because customers are switching from pay-per-use to pass pricing. The reduced fare reimbursement due to the state cuts. Other revenue, as I mentioned, the lower capital grant revenue, but that has an offsetting expense reduction as well. And then public funding is a little bit lower, but is tracking pretty close to budget with real estate transfer tax exceeding budget.
With regard to CTA highlights, I'll focus on the highlights for 2018. We've talked about some of these others throughout prior year discussions regarding our budget, but in 2018, again, we're looking to open the new South Terminal at 95th Street, so we're very excited about that southern gateway to the city coming fully online. And that's a big bus terminal for us that aggregates the bus lines into the rail lines, so allowing people to access the rail system at 95th Street. We've been able to complete the new Illinois Medical District Station. So that is a state-of-the-art station out there that provides a portal for hospital workers and visitors and people going to appointments out at the hospital district, so very excited about that. We also awarded the contract to purchase 20 new all-electric buses. So again, we're looking to ways to modernize our fleet, to reduce fuel costs, and we've seen good success with the 2 buses that we currently have, and looking to expand that through a federal grant, and we're excited about having those come online. We've released the All Stations Accessibility Program, known as the ASAP plan, that will allow us to achieve 100% vertical accessibility in 20 years. And again, that plan and other large capital projects, as you've heard from Metra and you'll hear from PACE, are also very critical to continue to receive state funding to be able to implement those projects as we move forward. We also launched the Fast Tracks and Safe and Secure programs. Those are funded through the innovative $16 million ride-hailing fee that we receive from the city. So again, those are going to speed up trains through the Fast Tracks program, as well as provide new safety measures such as cameras throughout the stations and expanded camera reach on the station platforms and whatnot. We've also implemented, as through the 2018 budget, the first base fare increase in 9 years. And again, as I've stated previously, that is performing as expected, if not slightly better. But again, we're not all the way through the year, so we'll knock on wood on that. With regard to the capital improvement program, the 2019 through 2023 CIP is a $2.9 billion program. And it does not have state capital funding as a primary source of funding. Again, we're only assuming that we receive federal funds as well as CTA and RTA bond funds. But again, it's critical to see that state funding come back online. We'll talk a little bit more about the major types of projects funded, but we're looking to invest in the capital program. Allows us to increase capacity, expand ridership, which again drives economic development throughout the city. We expect to issue approximately $185 million of bonds, again, because we've not received the state capital funding to fund various capital improvements throughout the system, which includes Blue Line, O'Hare signal modernization, traction power upgrades, facility improvements, new 7000 series rail cars, new buses, overhaul the 5000 series rail cars as well. The bonds will be fixed rate with principal maturing after the final maturity of the pension obligation bonds in 2041. And the CTA really looks at its bond portfolio holistically to ensure that we have a debt service level that tracks the tax regulations, the federal tax regulations, where you cannot have the bonds out essentially longer than the useful life of the assets. But again, it's critical for us to get the state funding online so that we can scale back or reduce the amount of borrowing that we need to do in the future.
CTA has a diverse source of federal and local funds for its $2.9 billion capital plan, but as Jeremy mentioned, it does not include state funding, which they've provided historically about 200 or more million per year. We really need a long-term capital funding solution rather than the fits and starts we've seen over the last at least 20 years. 5 years, we have a capital program for 5 years. 5 years we don't. 5 years on, 5 years off. So we're really hoping to get a new revenue stream that provides some stability to our capital funding. The project uses for our funding program, the capital plan funds transformative projects such as Your New Blue, Red Purple modernization, and the Red Line extension. And the CIP also funds bus and rail rolling stock and various facility and infrastructure improvements. We'll go through some of those details and updates in a moment.
With regard to the new ride-hailing fee, the city's fee generated over $16 million a year for the CTA, and again is being used to fund that Fast Track and Safe and Secure program. Again, the funding will allow us to provide faster commuter times on the green, pink, red, blue, and brown lines, as well as new and upgraded cameras at rail stations and bus turnarounds, as well as upgrade lighting systems throughout the rail stations. With regard to ongoing station projects, we have many projects ongoing. As I said before, the CTA opened the 95th Street South terminal project in April of this year, and we expect to have substantial completion on the North Terminal by the end of the year. The Wilson Red Line Station and the IMD on the Blue Line also opened up earlier this year. Quincy in the Loop is nearing completion, and we're seeing designs for the Damon Green Line unveiled previously this year as well. The CTA also announced $6 million in improvements at the King Drive Green Line Station. With regard to our rolling stock in fiscal year 2019 through 2023, with regard to the bus program, we will receive the remaining 25 buses under contract from Nova. We will also purchase 20 new electric buses under the contract awarded earlier this year. We're also doing a midlife overhaul of 100 articulated buses and a life-extending overhaul on 430 standard 40-foot new flyer buses. We will also continue the phased funding for the first anticipated future order to replace the new flyer 1000 series buses, which represents 55% of the CTA's bus fleet. For the fiscal year 2019 through 2023 rail plan, we'll continue to allocate funds for the new rail car procurement of the 7000 series. The manufacturing plant for the new 7000 series rail cars was built this year, and we expect to have 10 prototypes to be placed into service in late 2019. We also began the quarter life overhaul of the 5000 series rail cars of the CTA's rail fleet in early 2019. We also expect to purchase 4 diesel locomotives. Those will be designed in 2019 with anticipated delivery in 2020. And we also will complete the overhaul of more than 250 3200 series rail cars built in the early 1990s.
So we continue the Your New Blue project. We announced and began work on the next 2 major Blue Line stations, Jefferson Park Transit Center project and Belmont Blue Gateway project. The Grand, Chicago, and Division stations will follow. For RPM, the updates for this year is in 2018 we began property demolition and advanced utility work for RPM Phase 1. and we anticipate awarding the design-build contract by the end of this year. On Red Line Extension, this year we have selected the preferred alignment for the route based on public feedback, technical analysis, and agency coordination. And our ICE-funded projects, we're funding rail and bus improvements, which will enhance connectivity and frequency in areas with long travel times.
There's also some information related to comparative metrics to our peers within the industry. I'd like to just again point out briefly that we continue to be very efficient. The most efficient, actually, with regard to bus expenses per revenue hour, and third most efficient for operating expenses per revenue mile. So again, we our targeted investments in the rail system, in the bus system, as well as the rail system, continues to see us perform very well compared to our peers with regard to operating expenses per revenue mile as well as per revenue hour. You see here we're the most efficient compared to this peer group on both categories for heavy rail. With regard to our cost effectiveness, we see again that the bus and rail operations are both below the peer average and very cost effective per passenger mile. And then with regard to our service level solvency, among its peers, the CTA has achieved the highest level of bus fare recovery ratio and was just under the peer average for the rail recovery ratio. So again, we continue to perform very well compared to our peer group. The final slide has a comp against our service maintenance and reliability. And again, the investments that we've been able to make into the system allows us to have a very young fleet, as well as on the bus side, as well as on the rail side. So that concludes the formal presentation. Before we go into the Q&A, I'd like to again just to thank Bea and her team, as well as the whole RTA team, on again working together through the budget process. I know that's it's often wrangling cats, but again, we really appreciate Bea and her leadership on keeping all three service boards headed in the same direction.
Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you for the very informative presentation. And we have just a number of questions that we'd like to ask. One, if you could share with us what the primary comments were from the public hearings concerning your budget proposal? Sure.
Again, as Metro had indicated, because there was no service adjustments or fare increases, the questions revolved around four primary categories. One was funding and ridership. That was highlighted probably best by the Civic Federation, also indicating that they are very concerned about the lack of state funding on both the operating side and the capital side. The second category was with regard to accessibility, and there were a number of advocates there, again, applauding the CTA's efforts with regard to our ASAP program to become 100% vertically accessible. So again, I think that you're hearing from our customer base that they want to see that plan continue, which again is critical to receive state funding for as we move forward. The third category was safety, cleanliness, and comfort. And again, just highlighting the fact that the investments that we're making with regard to stations and rolling stock are critical to ensure that we're meeting customer expectations with regard to cleanliness and comfort levels. And then the fourth was with regard to service, and just some tweaks that they had suggested with regard to different changes in the service throughout the system. But again, we were not proposing any service cuts or major adjustments. So again, the comments were fairly modest with regard to any of those categories, but those were the four primary categories.
Thank you. And the reduced fare funding of the $34 million, your share of that, as you pointed out, was close to $14 million. Last year, you had to provide for the covering of that in case it didn't come through, and you did. And again, this year, you're faced with that and you're doing it again, so that we know that you've got a method of making that up if it doesn't come true from the state. Are there other questions or comments from the members? Yes, Director Melvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the really interesting things here is you guys get knocked a bit for continuing to issue debt and taking on lots of debt. And you have a lot of debt. And it was great to see the numbers in the appendix because you guys are obviously great operators. But one of the things is that for you to get federal dollars, you've got to have local dollars, and one way to get local dollars is to issue debt. So you're sort of in a trap, right? You can't move forward without issuing this debt that everybody criticizes you for. And can you speak to that, please?
That's correct. So there is a component on federal grant dollars that we have to come up with our own funding, and that can come in the form of state funding, local funding, or other non-federal sources. Those percentages are usually 80-20 or 50-50 in some cases. So again, there are situations that we have faced, that we'll continue to face, where we need to create those revenue streams if we do not receive those from the state. So it's very critical for us to be able to unlock those federal revenues, because otherwise those funds would not be able to be tapped into if we did not have those local match dollars. So again, that's a component of our needs as we move forward. And again, it's allowing us to continue to invest in the system that continues to draw riders in. We need to continue to invest in the stations, into the rail cars, into the signals, into the rail lines, and the buses to ensure that we continue to maintain the ridership base that we currently have.
Yes, Director Lewis.
Thank you. Jeremy, a couple questions. Maybe kind of following up on Chris's question. You used TIF financing for part of the creative structure last year. Anything in the future relative to TIF funding for some of the capital needs that you might have?
It's a great question, and we do tap into TIF from time to time on a number of different projects throughout the history of CTA. The largest TIF and the largest TIF and the probably the most innovative was the transit TIF that was established a couple of years ago. We continue to see good performance on that TIF increment being generated out of that area, so we're very excited to see that. And I think that hopefully will allow us in the city and others to see the benefit of a TIF project being funded through that innovative financing tool. So again, we hope to see that continue, not just for the RPM project, but potentially for other things as well.
Okay, all right. Terrific. I wanted to ask, as I did of Metra, the last mile. I know you touched on the ride-hailing fee, which is really a revenue piece, but in terms of proactive work with other agencies to really get customers from either the end of the bus stop or the CTA stop to their final destination, is there collaboration and partnership being undertaken to really kind of help? Because from a ridership perspective, it could be an enhancement.
Yes, we continue to look at all kinds of innovative, ways to continue to best serve the customer base. That will be enhanced with the rollout of the new app. So that app will allow us to provide, more, wayfinding, through the app itself, as well as have an open architecture so that we could look at, integrating, whether it be bike share or, other modes of, shared mobility. But also, one of the best ways that we can link up and enhance is the links between Metro Pace and the CTA, because we cover, between the three of us, a very large footprint. So, I think that we need to continue to enhance the connectivity and the wayfinding ability for customers that can utilize all three of those platforms throughout their commute. So, again, we're looking at all kinds of innovative, ways, and again, looking at, both the service boards and, all of the myriad of different options out there.
Can I just add one extra thing is the mayor a couple of months ago announced a task force to actually look more broadly, even beyond just the transit agency space, on how this mobility paradigm is changing, if you will, and has convened a task force across multiple agencies and entities, very broad-reaching in terms of thinking about how we better coordinate from a regulatory standpoint, from a cost and a funding, financing, all of that. So it's a broader look even beyond all the stuff that Jeremy said as well.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, two other quick questions, and one statement, then I'll be done. Your labor costs are about 2/3 of your total expenses, and you just signed the contract. How long is that contract for? What's the period?
It goes through the end of 2019.
Okay. So at that point, you'll be renegotiating?
Right.
Okay.
That's correct.
The last question is, Metro provided some good information on diverse spend. Do you happen to have any information in terms of how much spending is provided to diverse suppliers?
So we have some information in general with regard to our DBE program. This is a very important program for the CTA. Our goal is 26% of the contracts going to DBE participants, and we've had good success at hitting those targets over the last several years. So again, that's something that we will continue as we go into 2019. With some of the large projects, whether it be RPM or other projects, that will come online. So again, we continue to make great strides in improving our DBE participation and continue to set, and that's the low bar, right? So we want to meet and exceed that DBE participation level.
Okay. It'd be great to see those numbers.
Sure.
My final point is a statement. And I just want to commend the CTA for, first of all, this great presentation, but also for the ex-offenders program that you have. I've seen that on TV a number of times. It's gotten great publicity. So I think another enhancement that the CTA has undertaken is to really kind of use that program. And I think it speaks very well to our community commitment and our support to ex-offenders who oftentimes have a tough time getting back into the mainstream. So kudos for that.
Thank you.
And just on that topic, through the most recent collective bargaining agreement, we were actually able to increase the number of positions by 50 and add a janitorial crew for that.
It is a great program, and when you talk to the individuals that are participating in the program, we have a big rodeo every year out at our Skokie shops, and those folks come and participate in different events. And when you talk to them and talk to their families, they're so excited at the opportunity to be able to re-enter the workforce. So it's a fantastic program.
Director Sager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fine, I appreciate the thoroughness of the report. Thank you very much. You indicated that for 2019 through 23, you all are planning a rolling stock investment in a variety of different equipment. And this may be unfair, for which I apologize, but I was wondering if you can give me some indication of what the costs are of some of these capital purchases. The 7000 series rail cars, about approximately what is the cost of those?
So, Don, do you want to? Okay, so we can circle back with
That's great.
The specifics on those particular categories.
That'd be fantastic. I'm interested in those 7000 series rail cars, the diesel locomotives that you're looking at, and then the electric buses, as well as the new Flyer series buses.
Sure, we'll follow up with that.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
For the electric buses, we already have a base for 20, but we have options for it to go up to 45, and we have enough grant funds already to exceed the 20 buses, so we are going to go higher than that.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, Director Ross.
We talk a lot about ridership declines, but obviously some good things have happened within the system where you've seen at least pockets of success. Could you point out what a couple of those are, and could you tell us if there's an opportunity to expand in those areas?
Yeah, great question. I think that the Blue Line out to O'Hare in particular is kind of a good proxy for how we can see growth continue throughout the system. The Blue Line, particularly up through the Logan Square area, has seen a number of transit-oriented developments being built along that corridor. Because of the transit-oriented developments, you have kind of a built-in customer base. And you're seeing those people that are moving into those facilities going car-free in a lot of cases. And in some of those transit-oriented developments, they have a lower number of parking spots or no parking spots that you would typically see in some of the buildings built with the pedestal on top of the parking garage. So again, I think that is a good thing for transit in general, and something that you could potentially see because of the success along that corridor being rolled out along other corridors, other rail line corridors throughout the city.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Chairman Diller.
Just two quick comments. Again, thank you. I know B and our staff very much appreciate the cooperation, and we've had pretty much unprecedented cooperation over the last few budget cycles, which is a breath of fresh air, not only for us, but I'm sure for the CTA as well. I just want to point out that the transit TIF is benefiting neighborhoods, not just the central business district. There were 4 stories in this week's Crane Chicago Business about the central business district, which is humming, which we lead the nation in corporate relocations, and it is an economic driver. But I do want to point out the transit TIF, which was passed in a bipartisan way downstate, is benefiting neighborhoods other than just the central business district. I want to commend the CTA and Mayor Emanuel for the unbelievable innovation that you have during these difficult fiscal times, but have to point out the obvious, which is the CTA and its partners Metra and PACE are in big, big trouble if we do not get an infrastructure bill and improved operating reimbursements from Springfield over the next several months. And when I look at those increasing debt service numbers, we must have, with the new Pritzker administration and the new order in Springfield, a major infrastructure bill. And last but not least, I don't know if all of you have seen it who are members, but and this really impacts mostly, and the credit goes to the CTA. But the Metropolitan Planning Commission put out a report recently, and Leanne and I and staff were there at McDonald's new corporate headquarters in the Fulton Market District that scream the most obvious investment the state could make if it wants a 3 to 4 to 1 return on its investment in private sector money. 85% of all the new commercial construction in the 7-county metropolitan area, so I think they include Kendall, 85% of all the new commercial construction in the last decade has taken place within 1 mile of mass transit. And then also, just as importantly, 50% or more of all the new jobs created in the last decade in this same territory are within a half a mile of mass transit. So with all due respect, as the mayor pointed out yesterday at the City Club, to education and all the other very important things that rightfully get more attention, if you want one thing that's going to create jobs, to be the economic equalizer for northeastern Illinois, and the real driver of economic growth, mass transit is probably, at least from my viewpoint, the most important thing the state of Illinois can invest in if it wants to see good, sustained job growth and keep our millennial workforce in our state, not fleeing to the other 49. So, again, thank you very much. Your role as a transit agency has probably never been more critical in our city's history than it is today. So thanks, Jeremy, and thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe our next is the PACE.
Yes, now we will have TJ and the Budget Director, Reynaldo Dixon.
Well, good morning. As is my custom, I am not going to do the presentation. And then also, as our custom, as our case board is very adamant about this, so we have a relatively short presentation, and hopefully it'll give you time to ask us questions about things that you want to know about. And with that, I want to introduce Ronaldo Dixon and Melanie Castle. Melanie Castle is our secretary manager in budget, and Ronaldo is our budget manager and has been with PACE longer than I have for certain, and will provide you the information that you requested.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. To start, I'd like to give you a brief summary of our 2018 operating results. For 2018, we're projecting a small shortfall of $1.9 million. This is due primarily to shortfalls in fare box revenue and into our state RTA sales tax funding. Actually, we're projecting expenses to be $5.6 million under budget for 2018. The shortfall in sales tax funding, based on the RTA marks we received in August, are about $3 million. If right now that number appears to be coming in at budget, so it looks more positive than we had originally thought. But if that does come in at budget, then that number, that $1.9 million, will obviously be a lot less. The operating shortfall in operating revenue are due primarily to two things. The reduced fare reimbursement, we expect to lose $1.3 million from that. Our ridership continues to decline on our primary system, our legacy system. We projected a 1% decline in ridership for this year. It's actually more about 3%. So it's a little bit more than what we thought it would be. So we're expecting a $3.8 million shortfall in fare box revenue. The year-to-date trend I mentioned in public funding is positive, so it looks like we'll be good to go on that. For 2019, our operating revenues are expected to increase by 4.1% compared to the 2018 estimate, but it's actually expected to go down by 0.5% compared to the 2018 budget. And this is due to the continued decline in our fixed route ridership base. For 2019, we're expecting that to decline about 1%.
Has left the conference.
There's a small growth in other income, and that's primarily coming from the one-time reimbursement of some grant proceeds. Operating expenses are mostly associated with general labor and cost increases. The debt service associated with the design and construction of our Northwest Garage that we plan to build in Wheeling. And we're also experiencing some increases to our workers' comp and liability insurance costs. The public funding reflects the RTA marks. It also includes, for the first time, the ICE funding that was normally charged to our capital program. For 2019, we're using that funding to offset the cost of our Milwaukee Pulse line, which is expected to go online in March of 2019. So the 2019 budget is balanced to the RTA marks established in August. The expenses are expected to grow 4.2% over the 2018 estimate, but it's a 1.7% increase over the 2018 budget. Again, our ridership is expected to decline by 0.4%, but that includes the impact of the new service that we're planning to put in. The balanced second half of 2018 and 2019 will mitigate some of the ridership losses that we anticipated. There's no fare increase for 2019. Our recovery ratio remains steady at 30.3%. Our dollar ride and van pool ridership for 2019 is expected to stay flat. So the ridership losses that we're seeing are in our, what we call, I like to call our legacy system. We're seeing real growth on our express bus systems on I-55 and I-90. It's our traditional system where we continue to see the decline in ridership. For 2019, we plan to put in $1.7 million in service improvements. This is primarily to optimize service and improve on-time performance to hopefully increase our ridership base. This also includes the cost of adding the Milwaukee, our first pulse line on Milwaukee Avenue on the northwest side. To help pay for this, we're going to implement $1.2 million in service reductions of some poor performing services. And we've also implemented $1.1 million in administrative savings. Administrative reductions have been made to employee training and travel to offset some of the growth in 2019. These are one-time savings. These are things that as we go into the next budget process, we would have to reevaluate these on an ongoing basis to see if these are still good to go. On the next slide, everyone is aware of the problem we're having with the state of Illinois budget cuts. We don't need to beat a dead horse over this. This is just to show you the impact to PACE over the past 3 years, $13 million. I think it's important to note that if we had not had these budget cuts, that PACE would not have had the funding deficit it had last year and the projected deficit for this year. Last year, PACE had a small budget shortfall. It was the first time in 10 years that we'd had a funding shortfall in operations. If we had received the amount of funding that we had anticipated from the state, that wouldn't have been necessary. Moving on to the next slide. Again, this is something that you've heard from both Metro and CTA about no funding of a capital bill. So how does that impact PACE? For our particular problems, we have growth services on I-55 and I-90, and similar to what you heard from Metro, we do not have the capacity at our existing facilities or the buses to operate to expand that service. So we have service on I-55 that continues to grow. We just don't have the capacity facilities to put in the additional buses to allow that service to grow to its full potential. The other impact to that is that we're having to issue bonds to construct a garage in our northwest Cook County area. That's going, and those debt services pay from our operating funds. So that puts an additional strain on our already strained operating budget because we have to fund that debt service with operating dollars. Moving on to the next slide, our ADA paratransit budget overview. The ADA budget is funded to the RTA marks. For the funding requirement for let me back up a second. For 2018, we're projecting a $3.5 million operating surplus. This is due primarily to some savings that we're seeing in our purchase transportation area. PACE implemented some improvements to its taxi program in the last year or so. And what we're seeing is a migration from the vendor service or the bus service to the taxi service, and that is at a much lower cost to PACE. We're also seeing some other administrative savings as well. For 2019, operating revenue is expected to grow 1.7%. That's due primarily to ridership growth and an increase in what the RTA reimburses us for providing the certification trips. The cost on those are because they're being operated with taxis. The cost on that is a little bit higher than what it would be if we were using buses. For 2019, operating expenses are expected to grow 6.9% over the estimate, but 4.8% over the 2018 budget. and they are in line with what the RTA projected for ADA funding for 2019. We have a very small capital program compared to everyone else. Over 5 years, it's $289 million. For 2019, that number is $96 million, but 47 of that $96 million comes from the proceeds of a bond sale that we intend to do for the design and construction of a new northwest garage. That facility is something that is probably close to 80, 90 years old. It is functionally obsolete and needs to be replaced. The highlights of the capital program, other than the construction of the Northwest Garage, is the construction of a transit center in Joliet to hook up with their train station to facilitate the transfer of riders between the various bus services and the Metro service in Joliet. That concludes my brief presentation. We'll be available for any questions that you may
Great.
have.
Thank you very much. And we'll start with the same question as far as what kind of public comments did you receive as far as testimony at your public hearings concerning your budget?
Unlike Metro and CTA, we are proposing some service reductions in our 2019 budget. A lot of the comments that we received were primarily regarding those reductions, more specifically to the ones that we had in DuPage County and then Round Lake Beach and for Lake County. That's where the primary concern for the questions that we got from the customers on our 2019 budget.
It's certainly a tough budget when you consider you've revised or eliminated, 14 routes throughout the system. I mean, I would assume you would have had some comments on that. How many people were impacted by that as far as the reduction of service?
As far as the reduction in service, it's less than 90,000 rides a year. So it's a very small percentage compared to our total.
And one of your comments during the presentation, I believe, was that it allowed you to transfer about $1.2 million of dollars that you saved into the other programs.
Yes, so we're reinvesting the savings from those routes into other more productive services.
Great. And of course, like the other three service boards, you're confronted with your share of the $34 million fare reimbursement cut, and that's $1.3 million, and you had to deal with that in the past 2 or 3 years, and you've submitted a budget that will deal with it again if we don't get that funding. Under the ADA, Medicaid reimbursements are no longer included in your budget. Is that because the state doesn't pay it anymore, or you're just so late that you can't anticipate the funding, or why is that not in there?
PACE is no longer participating in the program anymore. There were some changes to the regulations that required not just PACE but our vendors to participate, and it caused some undue problems. So we have stopped participating in the program.
What kind of revenue did it generate when it was working and you were using it?
The amount of revenue was uncertain, and we would budget for maybe $1.5 to $2 million a year. We would not know when that money was coming or how. We wouldn't know when it was coming. To give you an example, a couple of weeks ago we received a check for a little over $2.5 million, but it was for 2015. The state was very late in reimbursing us for it, and again, we're not participating any longer.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Yes. Director Lewis.
This is a comment, not a question. It's actually a compliment. Recently, I had a chance to participate in a discussion where PACE was being asked to provide additional services. The highest form of compliment, I think, is when you can say no and leave the customer still smiling, because they came up with creative solutions. This is Jessica, I think is
Rabarczyk.
Thank you, and team. And I just wanted to compliment the professionalism and also coming up with a positive alternative that served the customer's needs, despite the fact that the answer to the original question was no. But the solution is one I think that'll be both cost-effective and positive. It was because of the budget situation that the answer was no, but the solution actually created, I think, high value. So just wanted to pass that along.
Thank you.
Great. Yes, Director Ross.
I recently attended the ribbon cutting that you held for the program with Lewis University. Would you share with the board what you're doing there and tell us whether you've had any results yet?
What we have done with Lewis University is we are providing one reverse commute trip in the morning and one in the afternoon with the service that normally would be deadheading back to Joliet from downtown. And and Lewis University is paying for our extra costs for doing that. I don't have numbers, Director Ross, but we'll get those to you.
I know they weren't expecting much in way of ridership until next semester because students have already made arrangements probably for
But
this
whatever
semester.
it is, it's 1,000% improvement over what the deadhead ridership was. So, I mean,
Yeah, and when the
instead of one-
president talked about the number of staff members who live in the city who commute out to the university every day, I think the program has a lot of potential.
Yes, yes, and that service right now, just to add on to that, Monday morning, the biggest complaint was that we don't have any parking left. We don't have any seats left on I-55 inbound, of course. The snow forced a lot of people onto the buses. Very frustrating for us because we could right now use 10 extra buses, but we don't have the 10 buses and we don't have a place to maintain them. And we don't have the capital funds to replace a garage in Heritage that was built by the railroads in, I think it might have been built before I was born. So that's the kind of situation we have. It's a wonderful market, but we're having a difficult time taking advantage of it.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Director Melvin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. The $3 million surplus at ADA, can you just talk about how that happened, please? Just interesting.
The migration of ridership from the vendors, which is in the city, it's about $48 a ride, to the taxi services. Our TAP program, it's funding about $17 a trip. So the rider will pay the fare, and there's a limit on the funding of about $20. So that price differential is where we're seeing a lot of those savings on the city ADA program. Also, we have some other taxi programs that we've implemented in the city where the cost is about 20% less than riding the traditional bus service. And actually, we're seeing an increase in our taxi services, not just the TAP program, but in our taxi service. People are moving away from the traditional bus service and moving over to the taxi service. So that's where we're seeing the savings.
Thank you.
Director Mel, if I could just add one, another brag point, is that we had a 5-year contract with the vendors within the city of Chicago. That's one of our biggest contracts. And that contract, we recently extended it an additional year and added no money to it. So what we're able to do in the city of Chicago with that contract is basically get 6 years worth of service for what we budgeted for 5 years worth of service.
Great. Any other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much. And TJ, it's great to see you in your last budget after many years.
Yes, sir.
So we've now completed the 3 service boards, and next is the RTA budget. And just as a brief comment on the service boards budgets, there are 7 criteria that our staff review the budgets that are presented by each of the service boards that we're required to make sure are met under the RTA Act. And all those 7 criteria were applied to the budgets that were presented, and all 3 of them did meet that requirement. And they did an outstanding job in the data that they submitted working with our staff. So we're really glad for the support that we have with the service boards. B.
Okay, so almost done, but now we will review the RTA agency budget. Again, this year, the RTA followed a priority-based budgeting approach. The budget was developed consistent with the goals and objectives of the Regional Strategic Plan, Invest in Transit, which was adopted by the RTA Board January 2018. We align the agency's budget with the RTA mission within the region. The proposed 2019 agency budget totals $41.9 million. So this chart depicts the portion of the agency budget which is supported by regional funding from the RTA sales tax. We also call this the net operating budget because it reflects expenses less associated revenue and outside funding. Here we compare the 2019 administrative and regional programs proposed budgets to the 2018 budget. The 2019 administrative budget net expense increases by 4.8% or $801,000. The 2019 regional budget's net expense increases by 1.2 or $194,000. The total proposed 2019 RTA agency budget of $34.2 million is expected to increase by 3% or $996,000 from the 2018 budget. Total agency headcount is budgeted at one less position than 2018. However, I will speak later to the fact that when you look at it as growth to the 2017 pre-state cut budget, it remains relatively flat. In 2019, budgeted funding and revenue total $41.9 million, as shown on the left. Of that amount, 81.6 or $34.2 million represent regional public funding from the RTA sales tax. The remaining 18.4 or $7.7 million includes grants and other revenue. Federal grants include $6.6 million of Section 5310 transportation funds, which are awarded every other year. So some of the growth is due to grants that aren't every year, but it'll show a spike, but basically that's pass-through money, grant funded. The budgeted agency expenses also total $41.9 million, as shown on the right. Administrative costs account for 42.2% or $17.7 million. Regional account for 40.7 or $17 million. Grant and RTA funded projects account for the remaining 17.2 or $7.2 million. For many of these projects, the RTA acts as an advocate and granting agency, receiving funds for the region and then administering those grants to the service boards, municipalities, and counties for planning projects. The proposed RTA agency budget is developed in two parts, the administration and regional programs. The administrative budget includes expenses for personnel, professional services, information technology, facilities, and other services that support the funding, planning, and oversight mission of the RTA. In 2019, the proposed agency budget accounts for 42.2% of agency expenses, or $17.7 million. This amount is 32.8% below this 2019 statutory administrative cap of $26.3 million, which is allowed by the RTA Act. The proposed 2019 regional programs budget supports services provided to the public. Regional services include the ADA paratransit certification, mobility management and travel training, the RTA customer service centers, free and reduced fare programs, and the RTA Transit Benefit Program. Regional programs also include the RTA agency's grant-funded projects and RTA-funded regional studies and initiatives such as the transit-oriented development programs, access to transit improvement, and community planning assistance. The proposed regional program budgets accounts for the remaining 57.8% or $24.2 million of RTA agency expenses. As part of the 2019-2023 five-year capital program, the RTA will continue to issue bonds to help finance service board capital projects. The RTA will have bonding capacity to issue $158 million in 2020 and $130 million in 2023. These bonds will be sold competitively and will feature level debt service. Keep in mind, these are the bonds that you've heard the service boards program into their capital programs. The RTA agency issues short-term debt because of the state funding delays for PTF, ASA, and AFA. The RTA's $250 million direct placement with Wells Fargo matures in December 2019, and the $150 million working cash notes mature in May 2020. The RTA will continue to issue short-term debt to the extent required by state funding delays when these issuances mature. Should the state make us whole and pay all this, we will not be issuing this short-term debt. The next slide looks at the DBE program for the RTA. The agency's goal on federally funded contracts is a little over 11%, and we exceed that by 3%. Additionally, DBA participation on individual contracts has exceeded our goals. Our efforts to continue the agency's DBA program include participation in outreach events in the region to network and support small businesses, and this included hosting the Transportation Symposium and Business Exchange in February 2018. The RTA has also started a DBE roundtable to discuss best practices, workforce development, and tackle barriers that are faced. This includes my presentation, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Bea. Are there any questions or comments of the RTA budget? If not, thank you. And the portion of this that's part of the public hearing, we'll be getting information on the comments and so forth sent to us, right?
That is correct, and as you know, we're streaming these live, and we will continue doing that.
Okay, thank you. Well, that concludes the budget presentations, and we can move into the regular agenda. Item 3A is a presentation and discussion of the Item 3B, I should say, is a presentation and discussion of the quarterly performance report. Jill.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Try to be as brief as possible, knowing that you've listened to a lot of things already. I'm here to talk about the quarterly performance report. If we can get it up on the screen. We provide this report on a quarterly basis at the same time that you are reviewing quarterly budget results to certify the service boards are in substantial accordance with their budget. This information is year-to-date performance results through the third quarter of 2018 in comparison to 2017. Yeah, one sec. Sorry about this.
They weren't ready for us to move so quickly.
Does everyone have it at their place? Maybe we can just
Everybody
kind of
has
go
it
through it.
at
Okay,
their table,
sounds
so
good.
maybe you could just go ahead and
We'll do this the
proceed.
old-fashioned way. First, let's look at, so we're on slide 2. First, let's look at system-wide ridership performance. Using data from the National Transit Database, we can see regional ridership results for January through September for each year over a 15-year period. Compared to 2017, cumulative ridership through the third quarter for 2018 was the lowest ridership of the 15 years shown. Compared to 2017, ridership through the third quarter of 2018 was about 2.9% lower, a difference of 12.7 million trips. Thank you. Thank you. I got to back up here. This chart shows RTA system ridership through September by mode, represented by the blue bars. The orange dot within each bar represents the peer average ridership performance for that mode. Our service board's performance was favorable to peer averages for 3 of the 6 modes. Compared to 2017, CTA bus ridership is down 3.3%, and CTA rail ridership is down 2.4%. Both of these results are favorable to second quarter results. Each bus peer agency reported ridership losses through September of 2018. And for the heavy rail mode, only one agency in Philadelphia saw an increase. Metro ridership was down 3.2%, about 2 percentage points lower than the peer average. Pace Bus showed a 3.7 ridership decrease compared to 2017, which was about 2 percentage points worse compared to its peers. Vanpool experienced a ridership gain of 1.9%, whereas its peer average loss was 4.6%. And finally, ADA paratransit ridership decreased by 0.6% compared to a peer average decrease of 2%. This chart shows year-over-year regional ridership through September, using the same peer metropolitan areas that we use in our annual peer review. Each region except Houston recorded ridership losses. The Chicago region ranks 4th of the 10 regions with a 2.9% ridership decrease versus the average regional peer ridership loss of 3.8%. On this chart, we are looking at a few service and financial measures. Year-to-date performance has some favorable performance for 2 measures, shown by green arrows, 2 red arrows showing unfavorable performance, and 2 black arrows indicating performance roughly equal to the prior year. Regional operating costs, after being adjusted for inflation, decreased 1.2%. However, ridership was 2.9% lower compared to 2017. The resulting operating cost per passenger trip of $4.61 was 8 cents higher, an unfavorable difference of a little less than 2%. Following fare increases at all 3 service boards in the first quarter, each reported improved fare revenues through September. Region-wide, the fare revenue per passenger trip, or average fare, was $1.77, which was 13 cents higher and about a 7% improvement compared to 2017. The fare recovery ratio, as shown here, reflects the ratio of fare revenue to operating expense without any credits or exclusions. A recovery ratio of 37.7% is 1.3 percentage points higher compared to 2017. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Joe. Are there questions or comments? On a national level, we certainly are in the comparable range of what the other services are experiencing. Has any particular state or service gone through a process of trying to identify what they're going to do about the continual decline of ridership?
I think
and developed a model, maybe the program that Leanne's going to today. I mean, that agency ought to be looking at this on a nationwide basis.
Yeah, I think there's stories to tell about all of these regions, but I think you can just see here from this graph, Houston went through a major effort to reroute and replan all of their bus routes, and you can kind of see how that.
And that's
a couple years ago,
result.
and so it's taken a little bit of time, and that's happening. I think you can see with the legacy systems, which we're a part of, as well as New York and D.C., there's been a lack of investment in the system, and so you heard all about that this morning, and so I think that's the challenges there. So we'll continue to kind of follow that.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, no other questions. We'll move on to the item 4A, which is a resolution certifying the financial results for the third quarter of 2018. B?
Okay, I'll just let it come up in a minute here. There it is. So this will be our September 2018
And it made me
year-to-date financial
realize
results.
later on that my parents came to this country to raise not a Vietnamese woman, but a strong.
Oh my goodness, that's a first. There's my chart.
A little different.
And I'm not Vietnamese. Today we will review the year-to-date financial results, which are subject to board certification. The service board's financial results for third quarter were satisfactory. System ridership was slightly above budget. Operating revenue was unfavorable, but expense performance was solid despite higher fuel prices. The regional recovery ratio finished the quarter above budget at 52.5%. As you know, there's always concern about the recovery ratio, especially when it's very tight. There's concern about the expenses. There's concern, you've heard from them all, you know, what's going to happen with the reduced fare reimbursement only coming in at half. But they do take corrective action throughout the year, both on managing through their expenses and while the fare recovery ratios may be locked in real tight, in all cases they exceed them slightly, but their commitment is to a certain number, and they're not always comfortable raising that number, but as a result, they do come in with their expenses tighter and so forth, and they're able to exceed what they projected. As with the second quarter, we would like to point out that there is no red showing in the ridership section, which has been showing significant shortfalls for all of 2016 and 2017. What that means is that we're on budget in terms of our budget projections. At the end of the presentation, I will be recommending that the board certify that the results of the operations of each service board and the region as a whole are in substantial accordance with the adopted 2018 budget. Okay, now let's look at ridership. Okay, hold on. System ridership through September was 0.5% above budget, as shown by the orange bars on the chart. Ridership has been down from 2017 in each of the first 9 months except April, as expected due to the fare increases, resulted in a total ridership decrease of 2.9% from 2017. But as we heard in the performance measures reports, that's actually stacking up pretty well compared to our peer regions. Now, looking back at the summary, CTA and Pace ADA reported favorable to budget ridership, while Metro and Pace Suburban Service reported unfavorable ridership, with the total ridership slightly above budget, as I noted earlier. Now let's look at operating revenue. Operating revenue was $9.6 million, or 1.1% unfavorable to budget. The shortfall is due primarily to the lower level of reduced fare reimbursement from the state. Pace Suburban Service has the most substantial operating revenue shortfall, which is highlighted in red, due to the lagging fare revenue and reduced fare funding. ADA Paratransit operating revenue is 8.1% favorable, which is highlighted in light blue due to favorable fare and ancillary revenue. Now looking at public funding, this shows favorable variance from budget of 0.5% for the region. Sales tax continues to show surprising strength, with the latest results in August about 4.8% higher than 2017. So this is prior to the 1.5% state surcharge. The real estate transfer tax, the RET, continues to show favorable results after the large sales this year, such as the Prudential Plaza on Randolph. Now looking at sales tax, in response to Director Lewis's request at the last board meeting, we decided to begin including this slide, which shows year-to-date sales tax growth by merchant category, in this case through the second quarter of 2018. The number in parentheses at the bottom of the chart indicates the size rank of the category in terms of the total sales tax receipts. The overall growth rate is shown by the orange line, which is 4.6%. And clearly this is being led by the automotive and filling stations category, also our largest contributor, at 8% growth due to the higher gas prices this year. There are also some known issues with IDOR data that we use for the analysis, as well as a significant lag, but this chart can provide some useful insight into what type of businesses are driving our overall sales tax growth. We'll show the slide with the quarterly results from now on, and we've also included it in the quarterly written report, which was provided to you by today. In total, let's look at public funding. It is now $5.4 million favorable to the 2018 budget. Now let's look at expenses. Through September, we were at $42.2 million, or 2.1% favorable to budget, with all service boards reporting favorable results. Metro had a 3.6 favorable to budget variance, highlighted in light blue, due to favorable operations, maintenance, and administration results. Pace Suburban Service had a 4.4 favorable to budget expense performance, also highlighted due to strong results in the same expense categories as Metro. Now let's look at fuel. After the first and second quarters, we alerted you to unfavorable fuel trends at the service boards. Through the third quarter, fuel expense was still unfavorable to budget by a combined $7.2 million, or 10.1%, as high prices persist. While this is 1.5% higher than the second quarter variance, favorable variances in other expense categories more than offset the unfavorable fuel results. So looking at the expense summary again, at the regional level, favorable operating expenses more than offset the unfavorable operating revenue, producing a system net result which is $38 million favorable to budget and a $12.3 million improvement from last month. Metro and Pace Suburban Service each had a net result variance in excess of 3%, again due to good expense performance. So now looking at recovery ratios. During the third quarter, the recovery ratio continued to strengthen above the required 50% level and is now favorable to budget by 0.7 percentage points at 52.5%. The fair recovery ratio of 37.7 is 1.5 percentage points higher than last year, and the all recovery ratio of 44% is 1.9 percentage points higher than last year, reflecting the positive impact of the service board fee increases. In the right section, CTA's recovery ratio lags budget by 0.3% due to their operating revenue shortfall, while Metro's recovery ratio was 2.8% higher than budget, driven by the favorable expense performance. So this is a good chart to look at, especially if you're new to the group, that shows what we call pure recovery ratio, some with credits and some with all credits. So you'll hear different numbers throughout the presentation, and you'll see why is it only 37.7 and why are they saying it's 52.5. So the true pure only fair is that first column. Then it's with all revenue and then with all credits. But what we get measured on is the all credit recovery ratio, which is what we report to the state on. So that would be the 52.5. That's the one that we are required in terms of their mandates. Okay, now looking at operating deficit. Focusing on the certification of year-to-date financial results through the third quarter, this slide displays the variances of each service board's operating deficit from budget. Each service board had a favorable result, with CTA essentially at budget, Metro and Pace Suburban and Pace ADA, with favorable variances exceeding 3%. The combined regional operating deficit was $32.6 million, or 2.9% favorable to budget. So accordingly, we recommend that the results of the operations of each service board and the region taken as a whole be found in substantial accordance with the adopted budget through the third quarter. You will see certification resolutions, which we then file with the state, as you know, on a quarterly basis. That concludes our presentation. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to try to answer them.
Could you go back to the fare box recovery ratio chart?
Sure.
So the budget that we had passed was at 51.8?
Correct.
And the budgets that, and I know this is a different topic, the budgets that we just received today for the 2019, our fare box recovery budget was what, 50.6?
50.6 or 7, 50.6.
So we always are very concerned about hitting our fare box recovery ratio, and now it's even a tighter than ever margin when you drop down to 50.6.
That is correct, and certainly it's an area of concern, and we'll continue to monitor it very closely. We did work with the service boards, and as you know, this is a negotiation. It is very difficult to get them to increase their recovery ratio mandate, and part of that is because, of course, the uncertainty, the continued 1.5 surcharge on the sales tax. All of that is being looked at, and their expenses have certainly had to increase. So we will continue to monitor it very closely. Yes, it would be good if it was higher. I'm not going to dispute that. But the good thing is that they always exceed it, which is why we were trying to get them to increase it. They do exceed it. They have in the past, and you can see that they're doing that now. However, we will continue to monitor it very closely, and should it require any kind of a mid-year budget adjustment, we will come back to the board and do that, and we've done it in the past
because
when we had the cuts.
The budgets that they did present show very high increases in fuel costs, and all of a sudden money that may have been there that they could negotiate with would be applied to trying to keep up with that. And with the state, again, like you said, will they reimburse us? They haven't yet. So.
Right.
So anyway, that's a very tight number.
So it is an area of concern.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments about the report? If not, can we have a motion to approve it? Motion by Director Lewis, second by Director Melvin. Roll call.
Director Colson? Yes. Director Groven? Yes. Director Cotel? Aye. Director Lewis? Yes. Director Melvin?
Yes.
Director McGallis?
Aye.
We have 6 ayes and 2 absent.
Great. Is there any other business to come before the committee? If not, can I have a motion to adjourn? Motion
moved.
by Director Melvin, second by Director Kozo. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you.
I'm sorry, who seconded that? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, everyone, for your attention during the Finance Committee meeting. It was a good one, thorough. I will now call this meeting of the Board of Directors, the full board of the Regional Transportation Authority, to order. And if we could, let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.